most of the reason I'm talking to you today is for Mr. Robot. And I loved the series so much, and I'm so happy that we are finally going to do like a deep dive conversation. But I do have some questions on some other things. So rather than just diving into Mr. Robot, which is going to take a long time, in my opinion, I want to throw out some other things. What TV series would you love to guest, write, and direct?
Wow. That's so interesting because, the first thing that comes to mind are I feel like they're the easy answers, like Twilight Zone and Black Mirror, because they're standalone episodes. But I feel like to give you a more interesting answer, it would be to like jump into a show like Atlanta, but I would never be able to be good enough to do anything remotely close as those guys, what they do on that show. So I think I might have to go with something totally out of left field, like Pen 15, just because I think those two leads are so great. Those two actresses are so amazing, and I would love to I think it would just be fun to just watch them perform. They're so hilarious, and I love that show.
If you could get the financing tomorrow for anything that you want to make, what would you make and why?
Jesus, you are not coming with the softball questions, huh? Wow. I mean, that's a tough one. I have a project but it's pretty ambitious, and I haven't finished writing it, and I really don't want to get into it that much. But it's a pretty heady sci-fi extravaganza, but it's really dense. It's R-rated. It's like, there's a million reasons why it's not commercially viable at all. But it to me is going to be that one Moby Dick project, that great whale that I'm going to be wanting to launch off the ground for the rest of my career. I feel like that's the one that's going to put me in my grave. So it'll be that one.
I actually think this is the perfect time to be doing something ambitious and cool and out there, because everyone's looking for cool content. So if you have a great script and there are stars that like want to be in it, I actually think it's a good time.
I mean, you gotta realize, I mean, if we're gonna get into it, it's the theatrical model is what concerns me. You're right to say that perhaps it'd be easier to get it straight to streaming, but the movie I'm picturing really deserves to be on the big screen, and that's the tricky part, because especially given with what happened in the past year, I think studios are going to be a little more gun shy to jump into an expensive original sci-fi film. But hey, man, I hope I'm wrong and you're right.
Listen, I think we're going to know a lot more with Dune later this year.
But even that was based on a very popular book, you know what I mean?
Sure, but unfortunately, I think the majority of people that are going to go see Dune, like 98% of them, don't know what Dune is, have never read the book. They're going to go because of Zendaya and Timothy, and it's cool and it's new. And like, if that film doesn't work, with what's going on, then it's a really bad thing for the marketplace.
That's very true. And I'm crossing my fingers because it looks amazing. And Denis Villeneuve is, he's one of the, if not the best, filmmaker out there right now doing popcorn entertainment at an extremely high level. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. He's operating on another existence, and what he did with Blade Runner 2049 doesn't make sense.
That they let him do what he did with that. Yeah, I totally agree. But yeah, he's doing it, and he's pulling it off, and he's not, what's great about him is that he's not really compromising. I mean, I'm sure he's been offered every superhero under the sun. He hasn't done that. He's done remakes, sure, but honestly, he keeps it pretty much in his tone and his voice, and he's doing it. See, this is the thing, and this is why I was talking about the rating, the R rating of the script that I was trying to make, is that adult sci-fi seems to get lost in the shuffle when it comes to theatrical, because, you know, rightfully so. I understand the business, the economics of what the studios are trying to do is when they put a lot of money into it, it really needs to be family friendly. But when you're going into it with like heady themes, it's just a bigger gamble for everyone involved. And I think Villeneuve is one of those guys that, you know, a lot of the studio system has a lot of faith in that guy, because he does it really well, and you know, at an exceptionally high level.
His movies are gonna stand the test of time, which leads me to my next thing. I read when you were growing up that you were a huge Kubrick fan, and I'm curious if you could talk about how Kubrick possibly influenced Mr. Robot, or little homages that you wanted to put into Mr. Robot to reference Kubrick.
Well, I think Kubrick is it for me when it comes to filmmakers. I obviously have other favorite filmmakers, but I mean, if you take what Kubrick did, and the way I was introduced to Kubrick was in high school. I had never heard of him. I'd never seen any of his films. And in fact, I wanted to be a filmmaker at that point, but I was really more driven by the more popcorn films that I'd loved as a kid, you know, Back to the Future being like sort of the apex of that mountain. So those are the type of movies I was thinking about doing, and thinking about wanting to make for myself. And then I was invited by a friend of mine to do. He was going to throw a Kubrick Film Festival. We would watch not all of his movies, but I think like 5 or 6 of his movies. But obviously all the top ones that you would think of: 2001, Clockwork Orange, Strangelove, and I was just blown away. I mean, when you watch something like 2001 for the first time, it just, and I still will say this, even though there have been a ton of movies made since then, it just stands on its own as it's an experience. It's almost weirdly, because I was so fixated with storytelling, and with Back to the Future specifically, and that script, it's so perfect. It's been talked about ad nauseum about how perfect that screenplay is. Every setup has a payoff. Every detail connects to something, and the sort of characterizations and the beats and all the moves that they make are so smart, and have such richness and depth. But then you get to 2001, and it's not. It sort of takes the storytelling roles and just tosses it out the window. I don't even know if you call it a story. It feels like an essay to me, but it's an experience. It's a transcendent sort of, I am going to suck you in and transport you into a whole other dimension of reality that we can create with our cameras here on Earth. And that's how special it felt to me. That's how deep it sort of penetrated my soul, and the little filmmaker me back then, how it sort of revolutionized how I even thought about film, because it wasn't just about telling a story. It was about so much more than that. It was about tone. It was about spectacle. It was about music. All of these things. It just so just your larger question about Kubrick, every one of his films, he has this sort of way in that defies the logic of storytelling, but where he's not just wanting to tell you the beats of how a character gets from point A to point B, but he wants to share the meaning of life with you simultaneously. And he pulls it off, and weirdly pulls it off in all different genres. I mean, this motherfucker did satires, comedies, sci-fi, historical drama, a romantic drama. I mean, it was almost like he was testing himself. A war film. I mean, he never. He was always surprising. I mean, a lot of my favorite filmmakers, they have a thing, right? They have their lane that they're good at, right? And they're exceptionally good. And I don't want them to veer off the path. Like give me what you're good at, and I enjoy it, and you know, challenge yourself within that within your strengths. But it's almost like nothing could touch Kubrick. And so for me, he's like Mount Rushmore, but he's all the faces. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't. I really. I struggle to think who I could put on that tier. And so when I went into wanting to do my own stuff, started to write my own scripts. Again, when you go through film school, or just even when you pick up a book at the bookstore, like I did, about how to make a movie or how to tell, like they really, really, really focus on the storytelling, which is incredibly important, and it is the bedrock. I totally I don't want to sound like I'm dissuading anyone from thinking that I don't find value in storytelling, but there is so much more on top of that. You know, when I got into TV was considered the writer's medium, and it was all about the story. And the only thing the director was really trained to do in TV back in the day was really document what was on the page. In fact, to a certain dictatorial extent, some of the showrunners would really make sure that the directors had every line of dialogue captured on camera so that they could put it together in post. But because we're dealing with a visual medium, there are so many other layers on top of that. And I think that's what Kubrick did to the medium that I had never quite felt before I saw anything. And so that's what I strive for. And even when I jumped into TV, that's what I was doing. Even from just a writer's room perspective, we would talk about how we're going to film it. Because I just find that once you start getting into that stratosphere, there are so many more layers and so many more interesting concepts and themes you can dig into. That's not just about a character and their journey.
I completely agree and get with what you're saying. So I have to ask, do you think anyone at any point in the future is going to make the Napoleon script? And if it was offered to you and they said you can make Napoleon and use Kubrick's script, would you do it?
No, I would not. That's just setting myself up to fail. I mean, again, we're talking about the king of all kings in terms of filmmakers, and that I'm not going to come close to that. But besides, I think one of the great things about Kubrick, and this is another thing that inspires me of him, is that he knows what even though he hopped around in different genres, he knows what he had something about each story obviously penetrated him. You could still tell it's a Kubrick film, even though you're laughing instead of being in a horror film like The Shining. There was still a connective tissue, a connective tone to all of his work. And I think that came from the fact that he felt a deep connection to every story. And that's been a guiding principle that I try and hold on to. So Napoleon, I don't think, hits me in the same way that it hit Kubrick. So, for that reason alone, I wouldn't touch it. But of course, again, probably wouldn't come close to what Kubrick would have done anyway. So, yeah, I'll pass.
I'm really looking forward to a project you're doing with your wife, Angeline. When will we be seeing I don't know how many episodes is it? Is it a movie? Is it episode?
It's a limited series. And, we're shut down because of COVID. And as you know, LA's numbers just keep getting worse and worse. It is a very Los Angeles show. There's really no way to travel with the show. It's pretty uniquely set in Los Angeles and in certain time periods in Los Angeles. So we're just waiting for the numbers to get better to get back into production. We're about halfway through it, maybe a third of the way through it. So we've still got a lot to shoot.
I read, and I could be wrong, that you were involved in some sort of Metropolis. Is that the case?
It is the case. I'm working on the pilot as we speak. I'm pretty excited about it. Again, I'm not going to get into too many details, but I will say I think there'll be some news coming out on that soon.
We're getting closer to Mr. Robot, but look, I think you have a Netflix movie with Denzel and Julia that is in development. What's the status of that? Are you filming that this year?
Yeah, the goal is to shoot that sometime later this year.
So you have the script done and everything?
I do have a draft done, and we'll see how it goes.
I'm now opening the door on Mr. Robot,
okay,
which is going to take some serious time. So take get a glass of water, take a sip. Are you ready?
I think I'm ready. I think I'm good. I'll just stick with this.
So jumping into Mr. Robot, for people that aren't familiar, I believe you came up with this originally as a feature. You were thinking about this as a movie. So can you sort of talk about the genesis of where the idea came from? And let's start with that.
Yeah. So, growing up, I was a huge computer nerd. I mean, I was probably on the internet before anybody I knew. Any of my friends were, because we would steal the internet from our local local college, which happened to be Rowan College, now Rowan University. But back then, it was all text-based internet. This is prior to browsers, and so I was really entrenched in that world, and I always found the people in that world really fascinating. And in the early days with BBSs and IRC chats and all that, you just meet a lot of wacky people, and but there was something really special about the way they saw the world, and then a lot of my friends ended up also being really into computers. So as a filmmaker, I always knew, okay, this is a world I think is really interesting, and it just stuck with me growing up that I got to tell a story about this world. Because the other thing is that when you watch these back in the 90s or in the 2000s, movies about hackers or television shows about hackers, sad to say, were not that great, and they really kind of missed the point. They would really talk about hacking by throwing bad CGI at you, and really not talk about the essence of what hacking is, which is actually not just a person at a keyboard, but really it's about social engineering and getting to the exploiting the flaws in people and the systems that people create, which I always found fascinating. So that was like thing number one. Thing number two was 2008 financial crash after 8 pretty terrible years with George W. Bush. And I just remember the rage I felt, along with, I think, the rest of the country. That's when the Occupy Wall Street movement happened. And that all sort of overlapped with all the hackers that I knew and all the programmers that I knew, who were sort of, anti-corporate, or had the anti-corporate mentality anyway, but the financial crash sort of confirmed all their suspicions. I mean, the top 1% finally became sort of like a bad name around that. I don't think that was a thing, but prior to then, but then it was very clear who the villains were in 2008. There was like no question about it. And so that thing number two was like, oh, I have my villain. I found my villain. Like, there's that hacker story that I always wanted to tell, and here's like the perfect villain. And then thing number three was the Arab Spring, which happened a few years after that. And I'm Egyptian, and I just remember watching it with my father when they took down Mubarak, and these kids, and they were all young and using the internet and using social media to organize and form this revolution, where otherwise they wouldn't have ever been able to do that. They wouldn't have been able to like organize in such a mass way that they did. And so I was so moved by that. That was sort of the third piece of that puzzle, where I said, okay, I've got my villain, I've got my world and my character in that world, and now I have like the journey, which is revolution, the journey, which is to, if you are so disillusioned with the world around you, can you use the tools at your disposal to change the world around you? And that's sort of what drove me to start writing or thinking about that feature.
When you went into USA Network to pitch, how much in the room did you tell them, like the overarching everything? How much did you know? How much did they want to know back then, that you had like a 4-season plan or a multi-season plan?
Yeah, no, they knew that I had, I would always say 4 to 5 seasons, because I didn't know specifically. I was like, it's roughly 4 to 5 seasons, and that I have an ending. And then I think I would always say, but if I told you the ending, it probably wouldn't make sense right now. And I also didn't want to share the ending. I mean, I didn't tell the ending. I think I told Rami maybe between seasons 2 and 3, and then I started opening up to some of the other cast members during season 3. But I was just paranoid that it was going to get out. I thought people were going to figure it out anyway. And to a certain extent, I started to not mind. But I mean, you know, I had a lot of paranoia. I mean, I think Emmy at one point was pissed that I wasn't telling her. I mean, that's how paranoid that's how paranoid I was. So I didn't.
But But isn't it almost better? Like, I'm a fan of the series, and I didn't want to know anything until I saw it in the show.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think when you're in it and you're making it and you're also so curious, I think it's just one of those things that people can't help themselves. And they also, I think a lot of people are kind of curious, man, you're really building up to this thing. What if it's not that great? You know, like, you're really holding on to this thing. I mean, it's been 3 years, Sam. You sure that's the ending you want to stick with? So I think that everyone was sort of fishing, kind of kicking the tires at the same time, you know? But yeah, so to go back to your question. So when I pitched it, by the way, you know, you were not expected to know the ending, because I think, especially, we're talking 2014, the mindset wasn't do 4 or 5 seasons and get off the air. The mindset was get on the air and stay on the air as long as fucking possible. You know what I mean? Like, that was the mindset. So I don't think they were that interested early on. I don't think anybody was that interested early on in how it's going to end, because in Success, I think everybody just assumed, well, I'm not going to actually stick to the 4 to 5 season, that I'll just go for as long as we're interested in telling the story, and that people are into it. But no, I eventually ended up telling the network, again, I think probably around season 3. And you know, they tried to convince me not to end it, not because they weren't supportive, because I got to say, you know, above anything, all UCP, my studio, and USA have been massively supportive. I mean, you saw what we did on the show. It's just a lot of risks, a lot of big swings we took, and they were 1,000% behind me on every decision. But it was, you know, they were such fans of the show, they didn't want it to end as early as I ended it. But obviously, eventually, they supported, because I knew it was creatively the right thing to do.
The first season was 10 episodes. The second season was 12, third season 10, fourth season 13. How did you end up with those? How did you end up with 12 in the second season and then 13 in the fourth? Were these your choices? Was this the network?
Yeah, it's a little bit like the Battlestar model, which is we just went in the writer's room, and we were, again, because I knew where we were going, we would put up what the ending of the season was. We put up what the beginning of the season was, and what is the most organic way to get from point A to point B. There was never a moment in the room where we were like, okay, so we need to fill 10 episodes. How do we do that? We didn't even think about episode count. We literally just thought about story. We thought about character, and we thought about what was organic. Like, we didn't want to skip any beats. So, for example, in season 2, because it got more immersed and more involved, it ended up being longer. The same thing with season 4. Season 10 was a lot faster, and, you know, a lot of the plot machinations required the characters not to really think or dwell on the choices or decisions, because they didn't really have the time to. We put everybody kind of under a lot of pressure. So there were less episodes. But ultimately, an episode count was never in our minds when we went up into the writer's room. In fact, that's how I determined season 4 was the last season, because after season 3, we went into the room for season 4 thinking still there were going to be 5 seasons. Because, again, I always said 4 to 5. Everybody always just took the higher number because I wanted the show to keep going. And so we would go in the room, we would start talking, and I was like, guys, I started to feel that feeling of we're treading water here. We're trying to fill up a season. And I'm like, let's just let's just stop. Let me put, because I always knew what the last 2 episodes were. But let's throw that up on the board. Here's where we are from the ending of season 3. How many episodes is that? And so we broke that. And I still didn't know. I didn't know if it was going to end up being 18, in which case, okay, fine, there'd be 2 seasons. I didn't know if it was going to be like a 13, where you could still kind of break it up into 2 seasons. I don't know. I kind of let USA make that call. But ultimately, I just found the right number for the story that we were trying to tell. We shared it with the network, and then we called it the last season.
You guys always got such great reviews every season. After the first season, when everyone's talking about it, did you feel any sort of internal pressure on season 2, 3, and 4 because the reviews were so strong and the fan reaction was so strong? Did it ever get internalized, or were you sort of like, I got this, I know the story I want to tell?
Well, it was a little bit of both. I remember feeling like, I got this, I know the story I want to tell, but because of the strong reception of the first season, I didn't know if that was the story people wanted to see. You know what I mean? Because I wasn't going to because typically, I think in a lot of TV shows, you would just assume Elliot would do some more hacking stuff and take down another thing in the second season, another thing in the third season. And I knew that wasn't what we were going to do, that this was going to be this gradual sort of long game to that final 2 or 3 episodes that I always had in mind. And so it's going to be a very different show every season because of that, because we were continuing down this path. So I was nervous, and rightfully so. I think because the seasons ended up feeling feeling very different from one another. I think people had very strong reactions, especially the second season, which I always say is my favorite season, but it's the most internal season, because to me that was the season where I really wanted to isolate Elliot and have him face the reality of his condition. Very different than the first season, which was more of this propulsive thriller-like storyline. So I think I was both feeling a little pressure, because curious if people were going to be into a show that changes so much from season to season. But at the same time, I ultimately knew that was the only way I was going to tell the story. I wasn't going to like pull punches on that. I wasn't going to just have him repeat the same thing every year. That he had to progress and get towards that end game.
During the process, I would imagine you had ideas, and then as you're going, like things, obviously happen. Were there any big changes that happened along the way that you were really surprised at?
I don't think so. I mean, honestly, I hate to say this, because I've heard horror stories on other shows, and but our cast and crew is like a big family.
I've never heard that before.
well, yeah, you're right. That's even a cliche, but I gotta be honest with you. It is sort of very true in that everyone felt like we were doing this very special thing from the beginning. I mean, even Christian, who, I was a huge fan of his back in high school when Pump Up the Volume was like on VHS. I played it like constantly, along with True Romance and Heathers. And I remember the first couple of episodes in season 1, when it started airing, he turned to me and he said, "This has never happened to me before. Like, I've never been in anything where this is the reception and the way where people were feeling about the show, but also the way we were feeling about what we were making." He was telling me he never felt that way before. The guy's been in incredible movies and has had this like illustrious career, and he's telling me that, and I don't know any better, because this is basically, after a comment, this is literally the only job I've ever had, and that stayed true throughout all 4 seasons. That never wavered or changed. And so I can't say there were any big surprises.
I want to talk to you about the fact of all the writing and directing that you did, because I believe in the first season you did a few episodes, and then season 2 on, you directed everything. For people that are not aware, when you're making a television show, Directing one episode is obviously a challenge because you're directing, but meanwhile, another team is usually prepping the next episode, or they're prepping two ahead. So I have to ask, how the F did you pull off directing all these episodes? Because I know what goes on behind the scenes in trying to bring this to life.
Well, first of all, I would not recommend it. I would probably never do it quite in this way again like that. I think it's very taxing. It's very, very, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's 100 some days to direct the entire season. And, you know, when a movie gets 100 days, that's one thing because they're shooting a 120-page script. Yeah, I'm shooting 13 episodes, and each of those episodes are roughly, you know, anywhere from 48 minutes to an hour. And there's different characters and different storylines. And not only that, I'm doing it all out of order. So I could be shooting scenes from the finale on day one of production. And then the second day, I'm jumping to episode 4. So it's a lot to get in your head. I think the only reason why I was able to do it was because I was a showrunner and I intimately knew the story more than anybody else. So I was able to kind of keep track on it. But I also just had an incredible, I mean, again, I hate to sound like a cliched asshole, but I had an amazing executive producer, Chad Hamilton and Kyle Bradstreet, who are amazing partners throughout every season. And, you know, and I had an amazing cast and crew that was, you know, my DP, my Todd Campbell, my production designer, Anastasia White. I gotta do a shout out to all of them. Kat Thomas, my costume designer. These people were filmmakers, or are filmmakers, and they sort of lifted up every, you know, they can't, you know, you can't ask these department heads to do what they do, like they would on a regular film where I'm the god and, you know, they just do what I say, because of the sort of the huge undertaking we were tackling. They had to step up and be filmmakers with me. So that's why, you know, weirdly, it was a very collective experience, even though I was the one director across the entire season. I leaned on my team a lot to make sure that we were able to like cross the finish line every year. And then of course, after every season, I wanted to pass out, but I couldn't because the very next day I was in the writer's room for the next season. It was pretty brutal.
A lot of filmmakers I speak to talk about how when they're shooting a movie, they're working such intense hours that they can't believe it. And as soon as the movie wraps, they get ridiculously sick because they have pushed their body as far as it can humanly go. Did that happen with you after every season?
Yes. But the thing is, I mean, yeah, the answer is yes. What you do is your body fatigue really starts to set in. Everything starts to feel just more exhausting. Just walking, just getting up out of bed every morning, it just starts to really wear on your body. It's not a healthy thing, which is why I'm advising filmmakers, do not do what I'm doing. I mean, the thing is, you know, when I think about like what Carrie did on True Detective, or even, you know, my experience on Homecoming, to do a season of a show and then to take a break and go to sleep for a while, or, you know, edit the thing and take a break before that's one thing. But what I was doing was, because it's, you know, cable, it's like the minute I wrap, I gotta go right back into the next season. They don't care. They want the next season to come on, you know, roughly around the same time the following year. And we would push a little bit because they didn't want to completely murder me. But it was just still a train that just did not stop moving. And that's probably the unhealthy part.
So I'm assuming that you had all the scripts of all the episodes done prior to filming the first episode.
Yes.
So that always happened in season 2, 3, and 4?
Correct. It was after to me, weirdly, even though I didn't direct all the episodes in the first season, that was probably the worst experience for me, because that wasn't the case. I had most of the episodes done by the time we started shooting, but I was still kind of working on the last 2 or 3 episodes, and I was rewriting. I wrote the last 2 episodes, and so I was rewriting them and working them while I was on set and had my laptop on there. And it just, to me, was just not. I just didn't understand that from my mentality, that once I need to write, and then once I'm done writing, I need to then go into production mode and then translate what's on the page onto the screen. And then once I'm done shooting, then I can go into the edit bay and then translate it once again. But that first season, I was writing the last, the most important episodes of the season, practically, which were the last 3 episodes, working on that while we're shooting. And then I'm flying back from New York to LA to edit, episode 2, which is going to be airing in 2 weeks, while I'm also writing and flying back to New York to be on set. It was just, that's not the way my brain works. And, God bless, there are a lot of showrunners that's how TV was traditionally done. That's how some TV is still done. They can multitask like that. I can't. In fact, I went when I first started, because I'd never set foot on a TV set before when I did Mr. Robot, and my wife Emmy, was on Shameless, and obviously John Wells is a huge showrunner and has done lots of great shows. And I asked him for advice, and he was kind enough to sit me down and go through his day. And it's like, he starts in the writer's room and then walks to set, then ends at the edit bay. And I just remember when he first was explaining that to me, I was just like, I don't know if I can do that. And ultimately, at the end of the first season, I said, I asked USA. And again, this is why the USA and UCP are so supportive, because they immediately said, okay, well, if you need to get all the scripts done before you start shooting, if that's your process, we'll stand behind you. So that's what we did.
I actually think that your process of having all the scripts done is the way I would do it. Not that I could do what you do, but I think it makes so much more sense, because then when you're shooting, you can shoot when you're at one location, right. You can shoot episode 1, 6, 7, and 10 while you're at that location. So you're saving time and money by shooting everything like that. And, I think it allows everyone to also look at all the scripts, the actors, and gauge their performance and through the entire season. Maybe I'm mistaken, but.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. From a production standpoint, it makes a lot of sense, because you can shoot out locations. Like I remember in season 2, we were in this beautiful home for the smart house that Darlene, her character, and F Society take over. And that's across multiple episodes. And I remember it was such a pain in the ass to load into this house because of the way the house was constructed. But again, gorgeous house. But I remember thinking, man, if we were on the old way, to go in and out of that house every week, even if there was like a 1 3-page scene, to just go in and shoot and then to leave and then come back, just felt very inefficient and kind of a very much a waste of time. So yeah, on that kind of efficient, on that level. But it's more, I gotta be honest with you, it's more the thing that you said about actors and the mentality. Now there are challenges, because like I said, we were shooting scenes from the finale first few days of production. So that's, even though the actors all have all the scripts and know where they're going, they're having to track their arc across 13 episodes and then having to like jump into that moment. So that proved to be challenging too. But I think ultimately everyone was happier with the way that we shot, because they always could, not knowing, I think, was always going to be a bigger hurdle than that, the not knowing of where your character is going to end up by the season.
Are there Easter eggs that people have still not found?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, which surprises me, because we have such a great community on Reddit. There's one in particular, obviously I'm not going to share, so don't bother asking, but there's one in particular where I was a little confused. I was like, were we not obvious enough? Because I felt like it was pretty blatant and no one got it. And, again, it's not relevant in terms of the story. It's not, so let me just explain just that it doesn't mean that you're going to miss out on what the journey of Elliot was, but there was just an Easter egg that I thought was pretty blatant, that I thought would be fun. That I thought was a fun reference that connected to the themes of the show. but nobody, I haven't heard anybody get it. I will say I've been pretty busy, so I haven't checked the Reddit page in a while. So maybe someone's cracked it. But I remember when the series aired, I didn't notice anyone figuring that one out.
I don't need you to say exactly where it is because I know you're not going to. But can you say what season?
Season 4. I'm talking about the last season.
Okay, I'm just making sure. So there's definitely one that people have not found. Are there others from 1, 2, and 3, or most of them have been found?
I mean, every little one, I doubt it. I mean, and this is another thing I really was inspired by Kubrick. He never wasted a moment to fill that frame with detail that furthered the story or the theme of what he was trying to say in the movie. And that's been my attitude with Mr. Robot and Homecoming. Everything I do is I sit down with the production designer, costume designer, DP, and we look at every frame, and it's just like, what? Like, I want more. What can we do with that? No, it can't just be a pencil. What does the pencil mean? Like, I got crazy about it. I got probably a little too OCD about it. I got fixated about it. So I would highly doubt every one of those details have been uncovered. And again, not that it should. This is a story, and this is a television show. It's not a crossword puzzle for people to crack. But so I would doubt that every little thing was discovered. But there was this, probably the biggest thing was probably that 1 and 4 that, from my memory at least, that I haven't heard people figured out.
Where did the idea for the F Society mask come from? And how long did it take to figure out the look of that mask?
It took forever. I worked with the production designer in the first season a long time. It actually came from, I spoke with a hacker that was part of Anonymous, and I was asking him how the V for Vendetta mask came about. And the story I got, I don't know, you hear multiple stories online, so I don't know if this is, I took his word for it, but I couldn't confirm it, but I loved the story so much I ran with it. But the story I got was, the story I got was that they basically they picked a mask that was available worldwide and that wasn't very expensive. And that V for Vendetta mask just happened to be a kind of like a popular Halloween mask or something that was available in most countries around the world, wasn't that expensive. And so that was the mask Anonymous chose to be their sort of avatar for their followers. And so I took that mentality and I said, okay, well, if F Society is going to do that, what's our sort of pop culture reference that they're going to use? And that's when I sort of came up with this little horror film that we show in season 2, but I was thinking about in season 1, that Ellie and Darlene, were fans of. And then of course it was just fun to try and invent what that villain was, but tying it to the sort of the anti-corporate themes of the show. I made it a little bit of an influence from the Monopoly Man, a little bit of an influence from V for Vendetta, and then we sort of just went from there. I mean, we had so many sketches of it because it had to be unique, but at the same time, it had to feel what's the word? It had to feel unsettling without being overt. And so I think that's how, because there are a lot of early sketches were so overtly creepy that I wasn't, it became too cartoonish. And so we had to dial it in and get the right sort of level of unsettling,
Completely. Have you walked around before the pandemic? Did you ever walk around Comic-Con wearing the F Society mask?
No. In fact, I had not ever been to Comic-Con until Homecoming, and I was literally there briefly for my panel, and then I had to leave because I was always working during Comic-Con. If I do, I will bring the F Society mask.
I want to specifically talk about the camera placement and how you guys decided on that when you were directing. When you were writing the scripts, were you already visualizing where the camera's going to be, how you're shooting stuff, and how much was it you working with your DP on set after you're blocking the scene, okay, now we're going to do this.
So for sure, filmmaking was a big factor in the writer's room. Because again, I've never looked at it as a writer's medium. I looked at it as a visual medium because that is what it is. And so that became a big part of how we constructed episodes and stories. In fact, that's how a lot of the format breaking episodes were invented, because I would say, well, if the story we're telling here is Elliot, discovering Angela's betrayal at E Corp, but at the same time there's a protest outside and Angela ends up stealing some, I was like, well, it feels like it's real time. We're writing this, we're thinking of the story. The story comes first, but then I throw in, well, it feels like this story lasts as long as the episode, 40-ish minutes. So what's to say that we can't then construct the episode as a single shot? And that, so one conversation would always lead to the other, or even like the sort of one of my favorite episodes, a sitcom episode in season 2, where we again, season 2 is all about Elliot's sort of internal reckoning with his disorder. Well, how does he escape? And then we start throwing out ideas from a filmmaking perspective that would push that storyline, which is, well, he would escape because he grew up watching sitcoms. Those were that's where he went for comfort as a little kid. And so, and then we came up with that format, and it always informed the filmmaking and vice versa. I would always, when I would throw it out in the writer's room, everyone would get so excited because I don't think that was a typical thing that people would discuss in the writer's room, because it was, again, really specifically all about how to get from point A to point B with the character, but not how you're going to film it or how you're going to put all that together. So that's sort of like the very high level, so those decisions get made then, that early on. But then when you're talking about production, what I do is I'd sit down with Todd. I mean, I just did it just now with the pilot for Acts of Crime. And we go through the script in detail, and we both are coming to it with ideas. Because, he's obviously a very visual person, as am I. And as I'm writing, I've got pictures in my head, and so does he. And so we just go through every scene and we share those pictures. And then we sort of decide which one feels more right, or is there a combination of the two, or do we throw both out and start to figure out other things. Some scenes we get to, and just knowing, because ultimately when we get to set, it's going to be about the actors and the performance. I mean, I always say this, but I think it's true, even as I think great as all my entire team is, from production design, costume design, cinematography, even editorial and post and everything, performances make everything. I always say that, like, a great performance in a shoddy production is probably still, I would rather watch than the opposite. A beautifully designed film with terrible performances, I wouldn't be able to sit through, but I would sit through a great performance. So I always say, we're doing the legwork, and we get in there. We're doing the stuff that's around the mantelpiece, which is the performance, which is Rami or Carly or Portia or Grace or Christian. They need to do their thing. And so I learned, I didn't have, actually, Comet taught me this. My wife taught me this. I would storyboard every little thing to a T. And then I would get on set and I would say, okay, Emmy, you're sitting here. Justin, you're sitting over there. And then on this line, you get up and you go over there. I would just, because I had it all storyboard. I literally took stills with stand-ins, just to literally, with lens sizes and everything. And then Justin would say, well, what if I got up on this line instead and went over to this corner that I had not even thought I was going to shoot in that corner. And Emmy would do the same. Well, I don't feel like I would want to get up and do X, Y. And it started to dawn on me that certain scenes, it's pointless to shot list. It would actually hurt the movie or the TV episode that you're trying to, whatever, the scene that you're trying to work on, if I went in there too prepared. So there are certain scenes where, again, we just did on Acts of Crime where we're like, it's three people, they're in a room, they're walking, they're talking, there's chairs, you know, I don't know what they're going to do. Blocking. And so we don't shot list it. We say, let's go in on set. We don't, and also it's location dependent. We haven't found the location yet. Let's go in, let's see what the actors want to do. And then that's when Todd and I huddle afterwards and say, okay, let's start putting a lens up. Let's start figuring out how we're going to tell this. And also sometimes they inform, you know, when we start thinking about how we're going to shoot it, we always go into it with a point of view of a character. And sometimes I don't know what that is until I see the actors perform it. You know, maybe I'm thinking it's this character, and then I see the rehearsal, and I'm like, no, I think it's that person over there, and I think the camera needs to be there, and it's a oneer. I don't even need the coverage of the other people. That happened a lot on Homecoming, where we would say it's blocking dependent. There was one scene in particular at the beginning of episode 3 where there was 3 characters. 2 of them were talking. One was silent, watching the other 2 talk. And so, of course, you assume you're going to block, you know, you get coverage of everyone talking, and maybe you get a reaction shot, and then you move on. But I watched the scene. I watched the rehearsal. Jeremy Allen White, who's also in Shameless, was in the scene, and I was watching. And the whole time during the rehearsal, I was watching Jeremy, and I knew that the scene was about him and how he was feeling about what was going on. And so I said, it's a oneer, and we're going to move to Jeremy, and we're going to move out, and then that's it. And we didn't even cover the other characters' dialogue, because that's what the scene was about. So those kind of choices get made on set, and that happened a lot, especially when you work with such talented actors. You know, on Robot, you know, it's a joy sometimes to just be surprised and discover something that you didn't even know about your own material.
I'm curious how budget played into the writing process and what you actually did in each season. Like, how much, like, let's arbitrarily say, and I know this is not the right number, say you had $1 million to make the entire season, and you knew that was the budget. So you're in the writer's room, and as you're writing, how much are you thinking, well, this is going to cost us, you know, $200,000. So the next 2 episodes, we kind of have to like stay in Elliot's apartment. Do you know what I mean? Like, how does that factor in, knowing the budget for the show?
I never let that factor in. The scripts, that to me was a poison pill in the writer's room. I never, and by the way, there were, you know, we would have writers in there that had been around in the TV world before, and that was always, I was surprised. I was always in the back of their minds. Well, you know, we can't do that scene. That's just going to be so expensive unless we make the next episode a bottle episode. And I just remember thinking to myself, how awful is that you would let that dictate what kind of story you want to tell. To me, it was always about, let's tell the best story. Let's not infect the writer's room with any of that. Let's tell the best story. And when we get into production, what's going to end up happening is someone's going to tell me, and it happened every season, this is too much money. This is going to take forever. And then I would pick and choose and say, okay, so across the entire season, we know these things are important. These things are maybe second tier. I take it back to the writer's room at that point and say, we may have to just streamline or consolidate these scenes. And then that, because you know, there is a value in the thought of, you know, if you don't have money, that can sometimes great things can come out of that, which is true. But I never so that was always like an afterthought. I was always, let me bring it back. And now, you know, we know that we want these high level things. I'm glad we went haywire and figured all that out. But now, like these sort of second tier things, can we find a way to streamline or get them from point A to point B? Sometimes we just make cuts because, again, runtime and runtime would sometimes be an issue. So we would just make cuts, and that would save us money. So it was always like an managerial afterthought. But to start off thinking that way, I always just felt was always a mistake.
I would imagine there were a lot of deleted scenes along the way.
Yeah.
Are there certain scenes that you really wish would be added back into the episodes because now that it's on streaming and, you know, now that it's not on broadcast?
No.
Or was everything cut?
Well, no, everything. again, because I had such great partners, there was nothing cut where it was like, we have to keep this runtime. I mean, if you look at the episodes, some of them were an hour, over an hour. Some of them were 40 minutes. USA, again, such great supporters of ours that they were really let us do our thing. We were more, I would say I was very hard on us in terms of, let's make sure things are tight let's be hard on ourselves about that. I'm very much about getting the pacing and the rhythm right, which sometimes doesn't have anything to do with the runtime, right? An episode could feel very fast but be 60 minutes long. That's why this whole sort of uproar about runtime always felt silly to me, like the number. Like, I'd hear people on Twitter complaining. They're like, another 62-minute slog. You haven't even started the fucking episode. You could watch that, it could be great. I mean, one of my favorite series, one of the years, it's a docuseries that OJ made in America. I think every episode was 90 minutes long, and I loved every second of it. And so when it's good, it's good. When it's working, it's working. You don't need to arbitrarily say, so it needs to be a certain time. That stuff we sort of put to the sideline. So yeah. I don't know if I answered your question. I think I did.
You did. I'm always curious with the hacking. One of the things that the show is always talked about, and one of the things that everyone agrees on, is the hacking depicted in Mr. Robot is accurate. And it's not just like somebody typing in 20 keys and they've broken into the NSA. You know what I mean? It's like, it's realistic. But so you're in the writer's room, and when you're coming up with ideas, like say the script, like whatever the episode is about, at some point, Elliot has to do something to, get into something. How was it in the writer's room in terms of, in the writer's room, are you like, Elliot hacked, like this is the scene where Elliot hacks, and then you hand it to like the people who know what they're doing with hacking and they're helping you? Like how were those scenes written?
No, because that was so important to me, because that's what I thought failed so much in prior films and TV shows when they tried to address hacking. I made sure that we had, first 3 seasons, we had a great producer, Cora Donna, in the room. And then in the last season, Roxanne was in the room. And they were they were writers. They were part of the storytellers. They were part of the storytelling team. So it was not just fill in the blank. It was, okay, Elliot needs to pull this off. And that was the other thing. We didn't look through the newspaper and say, what kind of hacks should we make Elliot do this episode? It was never about that. It was, well, Elliot is a character and we got to treat him like a person, and he's trying to do X or trying to get Y, or someone's in the way or whatever. What's he going to do with his strength? And then that's when Core or Roxanne would chime in and offer ideas. And then, because it's not really about a guy on a keyboard. It's really more about the social engineering aspect of it, about how to, manipulate people and fish people. So when you take that into consideration, it moves our story. It's exciting for us as writers who are not, tech savvy at all, to then find that social engineering as an interesting new drama, as an interesting new dramatic conflict to throw into the story. And that will sometimes then inform what happens after the hack. How does Elliot get out of it? Or how does he form a new relationship because of it? Those kind of things. So it was very much ingrained. It was not something that that we just sort of bracketed and threw it out. It was definitely a big part of what we wanted to tell the story for every episode.
I'm assuming while making this series, you learned an awfully lot about the way computers operate and the behind the scenes of networking and hacking and all that stuff. How has making this show possibly impacted the way you operate online personally, or the way you interact with certain things? Have you learned certain lessons? You're like, I will never click on something that I have never heard of, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I will say I've been paranoid prior to Robot. I remain paranoid. In fact, I'm shocked that people aren't more paranoid. I feel like the biggest issue right now online is privacy. No one seems to care about that much. They sign up for all these free services that steal all your data and are manipulating them in ways that they don't even understand. And so I'm a very, very, I will say, but prior to Robot, I was one of the reasons why I probably was fascinated about even telling the story about hackers is that they seem to get that there's this sort of nefarious thing happening online with data and protection and privacy, and how vulnerable people are leaving themselves with the behavior, with their online behavior. So I didn't really change that much. I probably got more paranoid as the years went on, but not necessarily because of the show. Just that it's, as you look around at the world, just it's a lot more dangerous especially with social media.
One of the other things that I loved about the series is the way it tackled mental health, which is something that not a lot of, for some reason, it's still a third rail with most shows. And it's just something that people are so hesitant to talk about. I do feel like in the last few years, it's gotten easier to talk about. More people are coming forward and saying, something I deal with, such and such. But what do you think it is? Is that something that you noticed, a lot of people wanting to talk to you about the way you tackle mental health in the series? And have you noticed, like, maybe it's becoming easier to get into movies or TV or become part of a storyline?
Yeah, well, I will say that I think when the sort of deeper connections I feel with fans are the ones that are suffering from from some sort of mental health issue. I suffer from social anxiety disorder. I also was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder early on. A lot of people did reach out. A lot of fans who had that connection, to reach people on a level like that, really, really, I felt that was profoundly moving. I think I put it in the bracket of, storytelling is just opening up in great ways, because these taboo, and diversity is like another topic that's, back in the day, it was straight white men were your heroes, and they never had a mental illness or a mental health issue, God forbid. That was the weirdo sidekick, or they would have their black friend, or their funny Indian friend. But it was never the general consensus was that the main character typically was this white straight male and without mental health issue. And when it was used, a lot of times it could come off very gimmicky for the sake of some sort of plot machination. And obviously you can accuse Mr. Robot of that as well, because we really delve into his mental, it becomes an essential fabric of the show, and it is largely part of the plot as well. But I think we didn't also pull punches with it. Elliot, as a character, warts and all, suffered from a serious mental illness. Even though it affected and impacted the way we told the story, and the way we created certain reveals and certain moves within the plot, we still showed, and hopefully that was at least our intent, was to show in a really honest and vulnerable way how people can suffer from mental illness. And I think, partly I think it's storytelling in general has sort of evolved in a lot of ways, where people are starting to recognize there are more stories to tell outside of the white straight male prototype. That's very exciting, and it can connect with people. But the other thing is and I attribute a lot of this to tech. I do think mental illness is also on the rise, and I fault technology. I know that there's a kind of a connection between the two. But I do think, unfortunately, that is on the rise, and so in a weird kind of way, that's probably a larger part of the reason why it's a conversation now, or it's in the public, in the sort of public square, because I think more people are starting to recognize that that they do have a problem or an issue that they can't quite understand or explain, and are afraid to talk about it with other people. And when they watch a show like this, there's a connection there that they can make.
I want to touch on episode 407, which is the episode for people that are watching, where it's all in Gloria's, I guess it's condo, apartment. I don't know what the right term is.
I would say apartment.
Yeah. But it's such a tremendous episode, and I'm curious if you could talk about like how that episode came about in terms of the writer's room, how you figured out it was just going to be this one location, and how so much was going to be sort of revealed in that episode.
Well, so that was a big reveal that I held on to for a long time. And that was like one of the things that I always knew we had to build up to. And when we started talking about that episode, the storyline was going to be that, you know, Elliot was with, you know, trapped in Chris's apartment with Vera. And I think we were cutting from that to the storyline with Darlene and Dom in Angela's apartment. And it always felt, I mean, I think it wasn't just me, but I remember just voicing it. This feels wrong, you know, with such a big reveal to cut outside of that storyline, the Elliot storyline. I really felt like we needed to stay with him throughout the whole journey, because it needed to grow within us the realization of what was happening or what was going on needed to sort of grow within us the way it grew within Elliot. I mean, the way when we would talk to our psychologist consultant, who has been with us since the beginning, since the pilot, she talks about how those sort of breakthroughs happen, and it's like a sunrise almost. It dawns on them in a very slow way, but then at a certain point, it just accelerates and comes out in this sort of really cathartic breakdown or outpouring. And I felt like the episode needed to reflect that. And so I was like, I think we got to stay in that room the whole time. And I think it needs to be real time. Like 305. It needs to be real time. We need to be with him through every beat. We need to be with Elliot through every beat. And I really want the audience to really be on the level with Elliot. And honestly, because, you know, when we kind of made the decision that it needed to be real time, you know, I knew that I didn't want a single take or anything like that, but I just remember feeling the sense of it needs to be them. It needs to be about them. I actually, as a filmmaker, kind of wanted to disappear. I just said, this is and that's when I started to say it's a play. It's a play. It's not I don't want to think about the cameras necessarily. It really is a play. It really is about the actors. You know, what I was saying earlier, the performance is the mantelpiece. Well, it couldn't be any truer than in this episode. It had to be about the performances, and I had to get the fuck out of the way. The only way this was going to work was if people were watching them and not paying any attention to what I'm doing. And so when I kept saying it was like a play, then we said, well, wait a minute, why are we like dancing around this? Let's just call it what it is. It's a 5-act play. We're going to go through the stages whereby Elliot comes to this realization about himself, and we're gonna step aside and let the professionals take over. Let these masterful actors that were in that scene just go with it. And so the second decision I made after I made the decision that it was going to be like this 5-act play, as I said, you know, when you shoot, just really quick, when you shoot, you typically shoot one side of the conversation. You know, someone's reading off line, and then you finish up and you do some takes, and then you turn around and you do the other side, you know. I was like, I don't think I can ask these actors to perform this off camera. That hurt me inside. It really did. It pained me to think about that, because I'm asking them to go to some really, really tough places and really get there and stay there. And so the second decision I made, which is again crazy decision that USA and UCP somehow allowed me to do and supported me with, is I brought in 8 cameras, and it was filmed like a play. And we would do an act at a time, and there was coverage on everybody going on at the same time. And the cameras we literally punched holes in the walls and stuck in cameras where we could. And I was literally standing in a video village with 8 monitors, and I was having to tell this camera to move over there to get that person's coverage, and move over here. Okay, now for this moment, get over there. But the idea is that I wanted to get out of the actors' way. I wanted them to do their thing, and I didn't want them to repeat it or do anything off camera. I wanted everything to feel live, and I wanted everyone to feel like they're always connecting. Because oftentimes when actors are off camera, they're looking over a shoulder. They're looking, they're next to a camera guy delivering these really intense, dramatic lines. And so all of that I made sure was taken away, and it was the real focus was just on the actors. And we shot it in 5 days, an act a day. We came in, we rehearsed the one act, the act, whatever act we were going to do that day, and then I would send them away. I would do a rehearsal with the camera to make sure all our movement. And again, we're 8 camera operators. This is just, you just don't do this on a show like this. And again, it was like one of those things where everyone felt like we were doing something special, and everyone just put their heads down and just knocked it out. And I give a lot of credit to the crew. Those days were rough because imagine 8 cameras in each other's way, there's one on a crane, there's people on dollies, and they're having to really choreograph and be in sync so they don't run into each other as we're capturing all of this. But I just felt like the performance here was what mattered, and we needed to get out of the way as much as possible.
Well, that's one of those episodes where the camera works great, the direction's great, the performances are great, the dialogue is great. It's one of those where like it all just comes together, the everything. But I am curious, when you're writing an episode like that, because it's finally pulling back a real reveal that you've been holding on to for a while, how long did it actually take to write that episode with all the monologues and all the dialogue that people are talking about? Was it one that like you guys kind of worked on longer than some of the other episodes?
No, it was in the room. We kind of got the major beats down of what each act was about, but because it was mostly dialogue, it wasn't something we really could work on in the room very much. It took a while to figure out how we progress to the reveal, and so the larger beats had to be really nailed down. But honestly, it was one of the quicker ones because there weren't a lot of plot machinations or plot movements. It was all about the dialogue and the sort of larger purpose of each act. And then I took that, and I remember, I think I was going away for Christmas. We had like a 2-week break, and Emmy and I think we were, I don't know, we were going somewhere, and it was a long flight is all I remember. I think it was like a 12-hour flight, and I can't sleep on planes. Emmy, she can sleep. She's totally, she can sleep anywhere. So she was asleep, and I wrote the whole draft on that flight. And of course, then I get there and I'm in the darkest place in my life. I'm just like, this whole thing came out of me, but it felt good in that sense. But on the other sense, I was like, man, I shouldn't have just written that right before this 2-week trip that I'm trying to spend with my wife here. But but that also felt cathartic, I gotta say, and my God, scary.
Obviously, it sounds like your relationship with USA when you were making this series was incredible, and they were incredibly supportive of, you know, putting the show on the air and giving you the artistic freedom to do what you wanted to do. Saying that, I'm assuming there's always a battle over something behind the scenes, or was there not a battle on this? Can you do you remember any battles that you guys actually sort of fought over, even if it was minor, or was it always very amicable?
I mean, think about the episode we just talked about. You know, to me, I was expecting that when I revealed that this is what's happening, that they were going to say no. I mean, this is just a bridge too far. It you know, to Anthony's point and to everybody out there who may have not loved that episode, it can come off as exploitive. And we were talking about an incredibly sensitive topic that touches a lot of lives in this country, in the world. And they didn't blink. USA didn't blink. They told me they supported me. I can't think of better partners than how much they've supported me and all the big swings we've taken in the show, including, you know, tackling an incredibly serious topic like that. So yeah, I don't have any dramatic stories for you. They were always on my side.
No, I mean, it sounds to me like you guys had one of those very rare, amazing relationships.
I mean, let me tell you how amazing it was. The executive that I worked with closely was Alex Sepiel, and Mr. Robot fans would know that I named Elliot's alter ego in the show Sam Sepiel. That's how close I was with USA. That's how supportive they were. That's how much I respected them, is that they became the alter ego of our main character in the show.
I could be wrong about this, and I apologize if I don't know this. Did you guys ever release like a big Blu-ray box set, or are there any plans for doing any sort of special home video release for the series?
So here's what I'll say, because I've seen this a lot on social media. There is a box set of the complete series. It's Blu-ray, it's HD, it's 1080p. I get a lot of questions about 4K release. I will say this now, it's unfortunate and sad, but we never finished the show in 4K because, surprise, surprise, 4K is a lot more expensive to finish than 1080p. So there is no 4K version of the show. Obviously, we shot everything where if we could up-res it to 4K, I would at some point love to do that. But you guys are going to have to tweet at USA. You can't tweet at me. I don't have the power to do that.